The latest edition of the college football playoff rankings are out, and not a lot of change at the top. There is some controversy, though. How should those SEC teams be stacked up? Is Notre Dame getting way too much credit? And what about Indiana? We'll break down all of these rankings. Rece Davis with you. Glad to have you with us. Pete Thamel is on assignment. Joey Galloway, my partner on the College Football Playoff Top 25 show, will weigh in as well. I'm sure most of you watched the show last night, so I'm not breaking news that Oregon remains number one. The Ducks leading the Big Ten. They have clinched a spot in the Big Ten championship game. Ohio State's right behind, 4 of the 5 from the Big Ten, with Penn State and Indiana at 4 and 5. Texas sandwiched in between at number 3. And the first team out of the mix is Tennessee, despite the fact that Tennessee has a win over Alabama, that their second loss was on the road against Georgia. They also lost to Arkansas. Alabama is ranked the highest among those two locked SEC teams at number 7. Ole Miss is number 9. Georgia, first team out last week, back into the field, ranked 10th this week. And also, I guess the big news is that Boise State, if these were the final rankings, would get a bye into the quarterfinals. This is not a complex or complicated system. I know there can be some confusion when you see two different numbers. I think everybody understands. You have to win your conference championship game to get a bye. The 4 highest ranked conference champions go into the quarterfinals. And at this point, that would be Boise State ranking higher than any team from the Big 12 at the moment. And BYU took a big tumble. Joey, I'm having you on for a number of reasons. One, I have high regard for your talent. I consider us friends. I hope you feel the same way. And you do such a tremendous job. I think you said we've been on this show together. Were you on the show from the first year, from 2014? Have we been together since the first year? I think so.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, from the beginning.
Okay, from the very beginning. So you are astute in the ways of the committee. You understand the complexities. You understand that it's not a monolithic body. They have to come out with one answer, but there are differing opinions within the room. But the other reason I'm on here is you said some things on the show last night that, knowing you as I do, that I almost felt like that you were lobbing a smoke bomb into the midst of the crowd just to stir things up, almost being facetious to make a point. Because what you said, and you correct me if I'm wrong, is that if you were Indiana and the playoff predictor says that you have a 96% chance of making the playoff, even if you lose to Ohio State, and the one thing you couldn't have happen would be to lose your quarterback, that you would sit Kurtis Rourke for Ohio State. And I can't wrap my head around this at all as to you actually believing this would be something they should do. Now, I will yield the floor to you, Joey. That's not really, no, I'm not going to answer for you. Yeah. Why would you say that that's something Indiana should do?
Let me give you a little history, Rece, because I've evolved. I was the guy that would argue when guys would sit out for bowl games, not play in their bowl games because they're trying not to get hurt. I was the guy I was like, man, I can't believe that guys would do that. I would never want to sit out a game that I could play with my buddies in college wearing the Ohio State University jersey and helmet. I've evolved now after watching what happened to Florida State last year with Jordan Travis, a team that was absolutely about to be in the playoff. There was no doubt they were in. Their quarterback gets hurt at the end of the season, and now they're out of the playoff. And what has happened to them since? Yeah, whatever. So when I look at this now with a whole different perspective, I'm being 100% serious. If I'm Indiana, I am considering not playing Kurtis Rourke. Now, I don't have to make that decision, so it's much easier from behind a desk to say, don't do it. I still feel that if you do play him, I would be super, like, if we could put him in a glass bottle and roll him out there. If I'm Indiana, let me ask you, if you're Indiana, which one is more important to you? Beating Ohio State or going to the playoff? Before you answer, obviously they would love to have both. That's not part of the equation here. if you could pick one, if you had to prioritize one over the other, which one would you say is a higher priority?
Beating Ohio State.
Then you got to play Rourke.
And because you go to the playoff if you do that. I understand what you're saying, that if you were in an either-or situation, that you're choosing it. But here's why I say it, Joey, and here's why I respect your right to say this, and I understand where you're coming from, but a couple of things as it pertains to this particular playoff and this particular team. No one in the history of the sport has lost more games than Indiana.
Yes.
Indiana is in a position right now to win the Big Ten. And if you put your quarterback on the shelf, then you are saying, we don't really belong. We're trying to sneak in the back door. And there's no way Curt Cignetti's doing that, nor should he, in my judgment. I think you play to win championships and you do what you can. Now, from a practical standpoint, as it pertains to last year and making the comparison to Florida State, you're right. That is the reason. And it's the only reason that they were left out of the playoff. But it was also because that we got a chance, the committee got a chance to see what the Seminoles were without Jordan Travis, and it wasn't good on offense. In fact, it was quite bad.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
We have seen what Indiana is without Kurtis Rourke earlier this year with Taven Jackson, who has also started some games in the past last year and is not at the level yet. Very talented guy, but not yet as polished as Kurtis Rourke, but a very good player. And Indiana could function with Taven Jackson at quarterback should Rourke be hurt. So that's one thing. The other thing is that there are 12 teams in the mix. So last year was the only year in the 10-year history of the playoff that you had a single injury have such a catastrophic impact on a team's playoff chances. Could have happened in 2014 with Ohio State, but again, you had data against a good Wisconsin team. Cardale Jones put up 59 points. And Ohio State, okay, the rest of the Ohio State team, playoff worthy in the judgment of the committee, and they went and they ended up winning the national championship. I think the circumstances are so different. And for Indiana, the one thing I completely agreed with McElroy too, if you were to do something like this, it's a culture killer. Everything that Cignetti has built has been about production over potential. And you have the opportunity for production against Ohio State. I guarantee you, whether I think they're going to win Saturday, whether you think so, I guarantee you, Curt Cignetti and the Hoosiers, they think they're winning Saturday. And they're going to do everything to, yes, they should. And I'm saying that if you start doing things like sitting your quarterback for the biggest game Indiana's played, maybe ever, certainly in our lifetime. You and I were, how old are you, Joey? Were you alive in New Year's Day, 1968?
I'm very disappointed in you, Rece. I refuse to dignify that.
You were alive. You were alive.
68, Rece?
68. You have been, you're 50, aren't you?
Rece.
Anyway, I was 2, so I don't remember it, but you could say the Rose Bowl against USC is the biggest game in Indiana history up to this point. Okay, fine, go ahead. They'd already lost a game. They weren't playing for the national championship. Saturday's the biggest game in Indiana history. Nobody's sitting that thing out. You know, if they could bring Antoine Randall back to play, he'd suit up and play, and you know, Anthony Thompson, any Hoosier would do anything to play in this game. Nobody should sit out this game. That's my point, is that you have to, for them, it's different, man. It's a different year and a different opportunity for them.
Yes. And so when you say this is their biggest game, would this be their biggest game, or would the playoff game be their biggest game? If you got to go either or here.
You have to play the one that's in front of you first to get to the other one. But I will still say, I will tell you this. If Indiana loses and gets into a first round game, whether home or away, the Ohio State game Saturday's bigger than that first. Now, look, you win that one and you go to the quarterfinal, chance to get to the semifinal. Now you have an argument. That first round playoff game, huge. Probably the second biggest game in Indiana history, but the biggest one is Saturday.
Hey, Rece, don't confuse protecting your quarterback with not trying to win. So when you guys keep talking about this culture thing, hey, look, now, cultures aren't built in one season. So when you keep saying this culture thing.
He's got 20 guys from his former culture, though.
Hey,
21, 23, whatever it is.
again, the Indiana football culture, as you and Greg would like to talk about, it doesn't exist. They're building one now. And so, in your first year, you have a chance to go to the playoff. And there's only one thing that can stop you. One thing that can stop you. I would eliminate the one thing. So now, that does not mean don't try to win the game. I'm looking at this from a standpoint of NFL teams. When they get to the end of their seasons and they're in the playoff, they sit their starters because they don't want anyone to get hurt because they're protecting their playoff. Now, they don't try to win. They still try to go win. They still go out, they play, they prepare, they practice, they go out, they try to go win. So again,
I'm not saying you're saying they're not trying to win.
Right.
But they're not doing their best if they don't play their best players. There's a championship at stake.
What is the difference? What is the difference in the NFL teams that sit their players? Are they not doing their best to try to win? Are they not concerned about their culture? Does that affect their culture?
I will grant, the court will stipulate that the culture is different now because everybody's being paid. Although I would suggest that Indiana's not being paid like Ohio State. That certainly has changed things. But
I would imagine that some of those guys are going to go get paid. But go ahead.
Yeah, right. Each team, I think, it might not be a long-standing culture, but each team, each season develops one. And everything Cignetti has pushed up to this point is they're trying to win. We're spending way too much time on this because it's not going to happen. Kurtis Rourke is going to play Saturday.
Hey, Rece,
he's playing Saturday. We're spending way too much time on it. I'm trying to get you to see the light here. I understand what you're saying about the NFL, but the whole thing in the NFL is about the playoff because there's no committee. Can I tell you this, Joey? If a team did this, if let's take, for example, they won't do it either, but the only way that I wouldn't ding them in that committee room, if a team had played a schedule, let's say Georgia. Let's say Georgia had run through its schedule and was undefeated right now against that schedule, okay? And Georgia went into a game, say, against Georgia Tech that didn't impact whether they were going to win the conference championship, didn't impact them getting into the conference championship game, and they decided, hey, we're gonna take it easy on some guys. We're gonna sit some guys. I'm sitting in that committee room. I'm not dinging them because they're already in the other game. They've got to play that game to get the bye. And we're in good shape. If Tennessee sat guys against UTEP, if Alabama had sat guys against Mercer last week, different thing. But if I'm in that committee room and I've got Indiana and I'm looking at it and going, okay, you've done a fabulous job against a 106th ranked schedule. That's what that makes it the bottom 28 in the country. You've done a great job. You've beaten one team with a winning record. One. You've played one team with a winning record. One.
Yes.
Now you're going to come in here against a playoff team, a playoff caliber team, and you're going to act like you've got it made. You better win. If you're going to sit your starters, you had better win. Because if not, I'm dinging you for it. I'm dinging you big time because that tells me you don't really belong.
I disagree.
Tells me is that you don't really belong. You don't think you can compete. You're afraid. And as I said, I want to emphasize they're not doing this, and they shouldn't do it.
Rece, let me say this. Number one, it's not afraid because
they're not afraid. They're not going to do it.
They're afraid of getting injured. And the second part, this thing about culture, hey Rece, culture is out the window now. We're in transfer portal bill. Every single year, you bring in another guy that is literally coming there on a one-year contract.
Correct.
So this culture thing that we have now, these guys, you don't show up for 1 year because this school gave you the most money and know anything about culture. What you know is, I got paid this much to come here and play football. And it doesn't matter what happened before I got here. I didn't come here because Archie Griffin and Eddie George played here. I came here because how much did you pay me? Do you think Caleb Downs came to Ohio State because of Eddie George And
I know why he came. He went. He got. It was the best offer. I mean, he didn't want to do a coaching change. I got it. Yeah, I get that.
Again, so what culture are we building now when we're literally coming for the money?
I understand. I understand what you're saying, Joey, from a big picture, but I think I would look at it like almost like concentric circles. Like in the middle of the circle, in the smallest circle, you probably have your individual team culture for that one season. Their thing, you can pull together for one season, no matter your motivation for being
Rece
there.
Davis.
And then as it gets bigger and broader out, I understand what you're saying. You're right. Those guys don't know about Archie Griffin or Hopalong Cassidy. They don't know about those guys.
Rece Davis.
Yeah. Woody Hayes.
That game that you watched back in 1968 when I wasn't born yet.
I didn't watch it. I don't remember it.
These guys are Indiana. They don't know anything about that.
Nor should they, but you're making my point.
You can't build a culture.
Okay, let's not say
you
culture.
Have to do things now.
Okay, I'm not conceding the point.
You can't even be mean to these kids.
I just told you I agree with you about the money. I'm not conceding the point on culture. What I'm saying is, let's say team chemistry. If that's because you're a guy who will split hairs over semantics. So you've got this individual team for the 2024 team, and you can be disruptive to that, whether it's Indiana, whether it's Ohio State, Oregon, anybody else. If you do things that are disruptive to that chemistry that make people say, that can be detrimental to the team. You know what? I'm going to give you one last chance, and then let's talk about something else, because it's fun. It's fun to argue with you, but you and I both know it's not happening. It's a moot point.
Here's what I noticed about you, Rece. Here's what I noticed. You will throw in just a little bit at the end and say, let's go somewhere else. But that one thing you just said, this thing that we have now, where a player is getting paid X amount of dollars to come play for your team. It's different team now, because there was a player there, lineman, receiver, whatever, that was already there. They go get another guy that comes in and they're paying him to play your position. A Rece Davis culture, this camaraderie, this locker room thing. I know you don't want to let it go, because it is the fabric of what we've grown up watching in college football, but it is gone. It's gone now in this portal situation. It's out the window.
I don't say gone. I won't say gone. I'll say way, way different. Way different. I acknowledge that. There's no question about that, Joey. I don't, because all it takes now, watch teams lose a couple and watch them come apart fast.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I agree with that. There's no doubt about that.
Places that have culture, places that had really good team chemistry. Let this thing go the other direction. Watch the people that just got there to get paid for that year. Different situation. I'm sticking to it. You don't have to agree.
Okay. I just wanted to give you a chance. I just wanted to give you a chance. I'm a free speech guy. You have the right to say things that aren't correct. And that's
fine. And you have a right to be wrong. You have the right to be wrong. Okay.
Yeah, that's all right. Let's if there's anybody, I don't know that we hit on this thoroughly last night in the show, mostly because of time. There were some other things, and also because of the you and I have a lot of experience in this, and you have a great phrase. You're like, why chase an argument? These things will kind of come back and settle themselves usually. But there is an issue brewing with all of these 2-loss SEC teams. And Tennessee got the short end of it, at least for this week. And I'm not sure that's justified, but I don't know who would be justified in getting the short end of it, because you can make a case for any of them being in any order. And I brought this up on a podcast earlier, Joey. In the old days, when the AP voters, if a team had lost to another team head to head, say, well, let's use specific teams. And Alabama beat Georgia, who beat Tennessee, who beat Alabama, right? Yes. And in the old days in the AP, you'd go, oh boy, I really, really think that Georgia's better than Alabama, but Alabama won. I can't rank them behind them, because you want to honor the result, and that's reasonable. And there was almost this sigh of relief when you had the circular thing of A beat B, who beat C, who beat A. So you can go, okay, good. I can just rank them based on what I see and the other criteria, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can take any of those teams in that SEC two-loss mix of Alabama, Ole Miss, Georgia, Tennessee, and make a compelling case that this team should be ranked ahead of this team because of X, whatever data point, whatever football judgment you make watching them. As you look at this right now, do you feel like Tennessee was unduly penalized for the loss to Georgia combined with their loss to Arkansas when you consider that they have the win over the highest ranked team in the SEC among the two loss teams? I know Texas is ranked higher, but among this two loss group, Tennessee is 11, Alabama is 7, and Tennessee won the game. And, probably the only difference I can really see is that Alabama's schedule within the conference, and probably out of it, but within the conference, has been significantly more difficult. I mean, you can argue that all you want, but the numbers tell you Tennessee is not going to win any of the tiebreakers, because of this thing, and it's a significant difference. But I have a lot of sympathy for Tennessee's plight or their reaction to this, because they beat them. They looked like the stronger team on that day. They hung in there with Georgia for a while. And, maybe I should say they looked like the stronger team in the second half of that Alabama game. But, there seems to be a pretty big gap in the rankings when there wasn't any gap. And in fact, it favored Tennessee on the field. What do you think?
Here's the first thing I would say to Tennessee is don't lose to Arkansas. And
they would then counter with tell Alabama not to lose to Vanderbilt.
Yeah. So the way I look at this is I stay in my locker room, right? I'm going to live in my locker room. And what did we do versus what we didn't do? And I would say don't lose to Arkansas. Now,
okay,
there are few times in our years of doing this. I think this is number 11 for us. Mm-hmm. And we've had other partners on that desk with us that have gone on to different things, but we're still here. And I think one of the things that we share is a respect and admiration for the committee and their abilities. And I think they've been outstanding for 10 years, and I think that they're doing a great job now. There has been maybe one other time, not many, where the weeds get so thick and trying to go down a road that I literally have said,
yeah,
I'm okay with whatever you guys decide. The SEC conundrum is almost a thing that it needs so much explanation, so many twists and turns that this person beat this person and this person beat that person. But then that it has become a situation for me that needs so much explanation. And then it's going to come down like tiebreakers. And anytime you get into tiebreakers and you got to go 3 or 4 tiebreakers deep to come out with an answer, that in itself says to me that we have such a cluster of teams and so many spots to put them in. So at that stage, if these 13 highly intelligent people with great resumes decide out of that group, here's what we like, I am in the sense of good. That's fine for me. And they could have decided that in a different way.
Yeah.
Throw Tennessee in there. And I would have no argument with that. This SEC thing has been one of the greatest seasons ever because they have outdone themselves with what they put on the field this year. It has been amazing. And some teams are not going to get in. But I always stay in my locker room. And each team had a moment in their season where it was like, oh my gosh, if we wouldn't have done this, we wouldn't be in that conversation. We wouldn't even, if Bama doesn't lose to Vandy, we're not having this conversation. If Tennessee doesn't lose to Arkansas, and you can lose to one of the big boys, you can't lose to one of the other dudes. And so when that happens, I'm like, hey, Tennessee, you allowed yourself to get into the conversation by what happened. Georgia, Little different situation.
Mm-hmm.
Georgia was playing dogs the whole time. It was
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
hey, if,
Yeah.
if there's one team that I would get on a table and fight for, it's Georgia, because nobody went through a gauntlet like they did. And I
Mm-hmm.
don't think that when you do that, it comes into, you got injuries, you got, and not just injuries, but you get banged up. You got to rotate a lot of people. I respect what they've done. I respect the entire SEC. But Rece, I'll be honest with you, I am perfectly fine with whatever 3 or 4 teams they pick.
Well, here's something else too, Joey. It's really easy because that's the bulk of your schedule within your conference. Tennessee's real beef with where it's ranked is not with the other SEC teams. It's with Notre Dame and
Mm-hmm.
Miami. Now,
Mm-hmm.
Miami, probably a moot point because there's an ACC team getting in anyway, whether it's Miami, SMU, or maybe even Clemson if
Yep.
Clemson winds up in the championship game. But, you know, Notre Dame's strength of schedule is way behind. They've got a bad loss. They've got a worse loss than Arkansas and Vanderbilt. They've got a good
Absolutely.
win in one of those SEC environments at night. Not a good win. That's a great win. Winning
Great.
at Kyle Field first night, great win.
Mm-hmm.
But beyond that, they've beaten some kind of average teams. And, even like as tough as Georgia's schedule has been, and it has been because the high end schedule has been unlike anybody else's,
Yes.
taken in its entirety, Alabama's SEC schedule has been more difficult than Georgia's in terms because
Okay.
Alabama played South Carolina and played Missouri. So in terms of record, but there's no disputing the high end of Georgia's. But Ole Miss is sort of caught a little bit of a break in schedule, and they have a bad
Absolutely.
loss. They've got a bad loss to Kentucky at
Yep.
home, unlike the other losses that
Yes.
we've talked about being on the road. But I would contend that the real beef is with Notre Dame, and to a lesser degree, Miami. And then I think it'll be really fascinating to see what happens to the loser of the Ohio State Indiana game. And if they fall all the way back behind all of them, which I suspect they will, unless it's like an epic, somebody wins on a walk-off field goal, something like
Hey,
that. I
hey, Rece
suspect they
Davis.
fall behind all of them.
Hey, Rece Davis. Now, again, I'm perfectly fine with the beef with Notre Dame. Again, this takes me back to, and we used to have this debate long ago. I think Washington a few years back was one of these teams that played nobody and they're
Mm-hmm.
out of conference schedule, but they were undefeated. This takes us back to that old argument of don't play anybody, beat the crap out of them, stay healthy, and you got a really good shot of getting in.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The problem for the SEC is they're not going to be able to avoid that now because of the
Right.
conference is so strong. But that's why when I look at the way this is stacked up, you have Indiana at 5 with a terrible strength of schedule. I do like they would have to get beat to death, like really, really stomped out. And I don't think Ohio State's that kind of team. Ohio State is not the kind of team that stomps people out. They beat you, but they're not going to stomp you out. Like they didn't blow out Penn State,
Mm-hmm.
which you would think that they could have, maybe should have. And so because they're not the kind of team that does that to you, I think Indiana's going to hang with them, and I think hang with them enough to still be fine and stay in the playoff even if they lose.
I think here's what I think, Joey, and I may be proven wrong. It's how I probably would vote. If they lose the game badly,
Mm-hmm.
then they are at best going to be on the bubble. If they just lose the game because they don't really have a big win to hang their hat on, but they've executed at a very high level, I would probably have them in the realm ranked where they would be right on the borderline of home game. I wouldn't say that they would have a lock for a home game. They'll be sitting right there on the proverbial bubble at the end. But I think it's really important to point out because we get locked in this conference mindset. As different as the conference schedules are, I mean, within your own conference,
Uh-huh.
it's hard to say they played an SEC schedule, they played a Big Ten schedule. Those are different things. Indiana's Big Ten schedule is and to be fair, nobody's scheduled for Indiana. Indiana's lost all of these games. They had, they played the two teams that played the national championship game last year. They were both on their schedule. Michigan and Washington had Ohio State on the schedule. And it turns out, that Michigan and Washington are just average. So you have to take the schedule in its entirety, and you have to make sure that you're not getting locked in to just comparing that cluster of SEC teams. You are comparing all of them. And I think the committee hopefully does that. You're comparing Indiana to Ole Miss, or within that group. You're evaluating Notre Dame against Tennessee, or within that group. So, we've both done the selection exercise. You start with, I think I've explained this before. Mm-hmm. People vote, whoever gets the most votes, they go into a 6-team group. And then they go into the ranking phase where they rank those 6 teams, and the top 3 then come off the board. And this is Reader's Digest condensed version, abbreviated version. Top 3 come off the board and go into the rankings. The 3 carry over. They vote again among 6. They get the top 3 from there. They go into the group. They rank that group. So there are mathematical possibilities that it might be that one of these teams ranked hasn't really been in the same cluster of teams with the others to be evaluated. And as more data comes in, it is likely that all of them will fall into that category, and it'll happen. I say that because there is a possibility, based on where the two teams are right now, that nobody has really, they haven't sat there and said, okay, let me look at Indiana in this ranking stage and really compare them to Tennessee. Right. That will come, as we go on here.
How far did Miami fall when they lost to Georgia Tech?
Okay, week 11, Miami was 4 and they were 9-0. And then after the loss to Georgia Tech, Miami fell 5 spots. They fell to 9, fell 5 spots.
So they fell 5, losing to unranked Georgia Tech. Mm-hmm. BYU fell 8? Mm-hmm. Losing 8 to unranked Kansas. So when we compare what losing a game is going to mean to a team, Indiana, if they lose, they're going on the road to play the number 2 team in the country. I can't imagine their fall being, how would you equate that? If Miami fell this many to unranked Georgia Tech, and I can't remember where the game was played.
It was in Atlanta. Yeah,
in Atlanta. So we'll call it a home game for Georgia Tech.
It was. It was home. It was a home game for Georgia Tech.
Okay,
road game for Miami. Yes.
BYU was
home game.
Home game. So they lost to unranked. Both teams lost to unranked. These are the kind of things that when you get in that room and you say, this is what they did, they fell here. This team lost to unranked and fell here. I know the committee, they may not do this, but I need a little bit of uniformity in the fall after losing, who you fell to, where you fell at. But I do think you are 100% correct when you say if Indiana messes around and gets put into that other cluster where the SEC teams are lurking, now it's going to get scary. Because that fall might multiply, even if in theory you would think it wouldn't. If knowing how the committee works in clusters, you could get in there and start to tumble, Rece. You could get in there. It's like the NFL draft when somebody needs a quarterback versus a team that doesn't. This quarterback is a top 5 talent, but there was only one team that needed a quarterback in the first 5 picks, and they didn't take a quarterback. Now the next 10 don't need a quarterback. And that top 5 talent starts to tumble. And this could be the same thing that happens to Indiana if they lose in a certain manner and get in that other cluster like you mentioned.
I'll reiterate a couple of things, Joey, that I've been saying for the crowd, that says, then why even play the games? Let's just have them walk a beauty contest. You know what? That's not what we're saying. You're honoring the results of the game because all other factors considered, strength of schedule, who did you play, who did you beat, all of those kind of things. All other factors considered, Indiana's not in this, right? They're not in it. So you're honoring the results by the fact that they are in it. Okay. So, but to your point, and I think it's the right one, if they lose at all, but certainly if they lose badly, it brings the other things under evaluation. That's what just happened with BYU. BYU's results were being honored because they were winning close games. That's a hard thing to do, and they deserve credit for that for
Absolutely.
sure. But they won a late game against Oklahoma State. They were, I want to say they were 4-0 in one possession games. That's great. Good teams win close games. I want to be clear about that. Good teams win close games. But when you've played a lot of close games, and they have a great win against SMU, don't want to gloss over that one. But when you play close games against lesser opponents, and when the power rankings and the people who know such things establish you as basically a field goal favorite over a 6-loss team, and you're at home, there's skepticism. And then they lose that game to a 6-loss Kansas team. That's why you see the tumble, because then it brings in the other things. It brings in, I don't know, I've watched them play and give them credit for winning, but, and now you're basically saying to BYU, fine, you've got a chance, win your conference. Or as you put it, keep it in your own locker room. Hey, as we wrap this up here, Joey, let's talk about a couple games. I know we've beaten Indiana, Ohio State to death, but not necessarily on the field. Ohio State has had a bevy of injuries over the course of the season on their offensive line. They lost their left tackle, Josh Simmons. That caused them to shuffle a little bit. And now word came yesterday that the transfer from Alabama, Seth McLaughlin, their center, has injured an Achilles. The sources have told ESPN, according to a report that I just read on .com earlier this morning, that he is expected to miss the season. And certainly if that's the case, then he is not playing against Indiana on Saturday. So that would necessitate further shuffling on the offensive line. Although Ohio State has some depth there. They have, people who played there last year. Now 2 starters down from when you were at your best. What impact on Ohio State, not only for the Indiana game, but for the Indiana game and as they proceed into the postseason?
It seemed like that shuffling of the offensive line came together in the fourth quarter of the Penn State game. And it was like, these guys look like a unit now. They don't look like players. They look like a unit. To be successful, you need your offensive line to look like a unit, not individual players. And they look like that since the Penn State game. Now they take another hit. I think what we find now, and I think me and you have discussed this, when we talk transfer portal, a lot of times we speak of quarterbacks and running backs, maybe some receivers, the sexy positions. And for years there, it was only affecting the quarterback situation. Nobody had a backup quarterback because at the end of spring, if he wasn't a starter, he was leaving. So your starter quarterback got hurt, you pulled to Florida State. You took a really big leap down. That is now affecting these other positions also. And I joked with you about the Georgia D-line and the Texas game. They start rotating guys and you don't normally see. And we are seeing now that these teams don't have the kind of depth at these positions that they used to have. Because if a guy is the second string or third string guy, he's leaving because everybody needs offensive linemen. So Ohio State does have players, but they were already shuffling. They were already trying to find themselves, and they finally got to a place to find. And 4 days before maybe your biggest game of the season, you lose your center in the unit, and the center is the captain of the unit. That is a tough ask. I don't know what kind of depth they have, but when you talk depth at center, it isn't just talent, because that's one thing. But the center is the guy that's the leader of the unit. He has to help with the calls. He has to direct people. And so not only you have to have a guy that's talented, you have a guy that can handle the leadership role of being a center. So now it's going to be tougher for Ohio State to now kind of find themselves and be ready for Indiana coming to town, which some would argue this will be their biggest game so to speak, because this is the one that says whether they have a chance to go to the Big Ten championship game or not. Oregon, you could take that loss. It was on the road. This one is, do we get to the Big Ten championship game?
And this Indiana team, for all the talk about Kurtis Rourke and Surratt and, you know, all of the things they've done offensively, they're number 2 in the country in yards per play on defense, yards per play allowed. Them and Ohio State are right. They're allowing just over 4 yards per play. They're already good on defense, and having challenges on the offensive line is a tough way to go. Let's do some quick hitters right here. Who's the best team in the Big 12?
In the Big 12, I would say Colorado.
I agree with you. Who's the best team in the ACC?
Miami.
Better than SMU?
I would say Miami, yes.
Okay.
Now, believe me, now that is paper thin. That ain't like, I feel like Colorado is the best team in the Big 12. Miami, when they're playing well, is the best team in the ACC. But we've also seen them play like they're not very good.
I agree. I agree with you. Mountain West and the American. Who's the better team? Boise State, or I know Army's undefeated. If you want to say Army, fine. Who's the best team? Boise State, Army, Tulane.
Boise State, Tulane, then Army.
Okay.
And I love Army. Don't get me wrong, but
Okay. Who's better? Who's better, Boise State or Colorado?
I'm going to say Colorado because I think they're more multifaceted than Boise State. Although I think Boise State has done a terrific job, especially in recent weeks, of having to find other ways when teams put 12 guys in the box to stop the run.
That'll be the interesting thing to me. If somehow they were to meet in a playoff situation. Also fascinating to see who would get the nod. I would probably lean if Colorado runs through here. I definitely think they're the best team in the Big 12 because they have difference makers. It's not appreciably better, but I mean, when Travis Hunter and Shador and the other receivers they have, Webster, Shepard, they've got guys who can make a difference. And I think they have more of those guys than the other teams in the Big 12. I also think they have so many of those that might give them an edge from a football judgment standpoint against Boise State. I would suspect if Colorado runs out and wins the Big 12, not a given. Arizona State's going to have something to say about that. BYU might still have something to say about that.
Kansas has something to say about that.
Kansas might just finish being spoiler for everyone.
Yeah.
But I would suspect that the Big 12 winner will still get that fourth quarterfinal spot. Boise State has it at this moment. I suspect they will, but I don't think it's a lock. I really want the committee next year to say, okay, you got the automatic bids, but we're ranking them in the top 4, get the buys. That's what they should do. But
that makes sense.
I understand. I mean, your reward for winning your conference, because all conferences are not created equally, your reward for winning the conference is you're in. If you think the committee messed it up, go win the games. Stay in your own locker room. I'm going to steal that from you and use that. Stay in your own locker room. The best way to go.
Right. Hey, Rece, I'm used to you stealing my stuff. You can have it.
Oh yeah. That's right. Yeah. I kind of look at it like we share, Joey. Share and share alike, right?
It's both of ours. I get it.
That's what we do. We've been together a while. Joey, it's been fun, man. I still can't believe you're serious about the Indiana quarterback thing, but I think we've beaten that to death. It's not going to happen. So anyway, I respect your right to say it. So thanks for being on. I appreciate you taking time.
Hey, I appreciate it, Rece. And now that I think about it, Ohio State shouldn't play Will Howard either. All right, let's go.
Joey just wants to get some people on the end of the bench some run. That's what you're trying to do.
Let them all play, Rece. Let them all play.
Oh, we encourage you to subscribe to the College Game Day podcast or download wherever you prefer to get your podcast. You can get more outrageous takes from time to time like that. Thamel on assignment, working on big stories that will be unveiled in the coming days. We appreciate you listening, and download this wherever you prefer to get your podcast. Subscribe once again for a second time, because I probably was supposed to say that at the beginning of the podcast, but I forgot. Talk to you next time.